death spiral. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. What you're looking at now is two first ministers in a row, both of them SNP first ministers, being involved, at least in a family sense, with a police investigation. Now, that is an astonishing thing. And it is an astonishing thing from a party which presents itself as Scotland's party. Not simply Scotland's party, but a party that seeks to be different from the sleaze of Westminster. And as to that bizarre statement from Nicola Sturgeon yesterday, I mean, nothing is stopping her about a police investigation from simply telling us where the money went. That in no way inhibits the police. She could put to rest this story by saying where the money has gone. And it seems to me a bit bizarre to ask for privacy and indeed sympathy because she's having a tough time when it's the accounts of a party she led and was administered by her husband that has apparently mislaid £600,000.
In terms of this week, I was reflecting yesterday. It struck me that the same characters are really directing the narrative of Scottish politics. Nicola Sturgeon, Peter Murrell, Alex Salmond, and then within all of that, we've got the self-confessed continuity candidate Humza Yousaf as well. And so it feels like, in some ways, nothing has changed by way of the narrative of Scottish politics.
Well, I think that's absolutely spot on, and yet at the same time, it's as if if you imagine this as a play, the characters are all the same, but all of a sudden a sort of pleasant comedy has turned into a tragedy, as if the entire scenery behind them has changed, and certainly the audience's expectations have changed. I mean, let's just pick up on some of your good points. Humza Yousaf is undeniably the continuity candidate, but what is he to continue at this point? I mean, Nicola Sturgeon left stage with quite a poor reputation on delivery of policy. The reputation for competence had been lost amid long NHS waiting lists and poor education policy. Now we have seen the reputation of the party as a whole is certainly in peril. And for all the fact that, I'm very alert that obviously whilst a police investigation is going on, that there are rules we must follow. But that doesn't stop us from simply stating we still don't know where the £600,000 went.
Yeah.
And actually, as I say, that you could still tell us that without in any way infringing on the police. But as to the continuity, what we have now is Humza Yousaf as the First Minister with nothing to continue. And Michael Russell, the president of the party, said the party is in its worst state for 50 years. Now that is an astonishing statement to make, but I suspect probably true, because I think what you've got is that a party who, after 8 years of astonishing electoral success, but nonetheless unable to further its core strategy of independence, you can now see that all the aura, the authority that surrounded those characters of Salmond, of Sturgeon, of Murrell, and of many others, is now exposed as something of smoke and mirrors. I absolutely think this is a crisis, not just for the SNP, but for Scotland, because after 25 years of devolution, we're looking at becoming something of a laughingstock, I'm afraid. Not that we can't govern ourselves, of course we can. Any group of people can govern themselves, but we seem to have set off in a very inept way.
We'll come back to the implications for Scotland, because that's what your piece in the Sunday Times today is all about, and I am fascinated about that. I just want to pick up on a couple of the words you used there, exposed, smoke and mirrors, that sort of thing, because at the heart of this, surely, are questions about secrecy, a lack of transparency around the SNP's governance and finance. And I'm just trying to think back, and was it ever thus, Alex? When you were working alongside Alex Salmond in the party machine there, was there always a kind of, batten down the hatches, it's us against the world, and a sort of lack of transparency, fundamentally?
Well, certainly, I mean, listeners will be interested in two sort of personal points I'll make here, which is that I was first speechwriter and head of policy to Alex Salmond at the very first devolution election of 1999. And then it seemed to me pretty obvious that our grip on what independence meant was a bit shaky, but nonetheless, because we was the struggling incomer party, it was legitimate to put together a formidable front and to tough stuff out, until we'd found our feet, if you like. But then again, I was invited in 2010 by Alex Salmond to become head of policy again. And by 2013, we'd fallen out and I left government because it still seemed to me that those blanks hadn't been filled in. And listeners might be wondering why head of policy is so critical of the party. It's because I spent the last 8 years being critical of the party, and that is precisely because they have opted for a PR approach to what is something a great deal more complicated than sales alone. And I think that began to sink into their very culture, such that everything became about, could you slightly tweak yesterday's news to make sure tomorrow's news looked good? Now, all political parties do this. I don't think there's an exception here. The trouble being is that they became, I think, so hooked on this that everything became worth sacrificing for the sake of the image. And what that meant is that people like Humza Yousaf could rise up the party looking good for image without ever being required to deliver, hence his nickname of being useless, which is a bit unkind, obviously, but nonetheless, it's not a great start to only be in office for 2 weeks and already have a negative nickname. And I think what you're seeing now is the payoff of 25 years of really efficient politicking, really successful for winning all those elections, but which took too much of an eye off the substance and the credibility of the movement. And I think that what's sad about that is that it's left a nationalist movement, a wider yes movement, and a nation now slightly exposed as being, why do we believe all this? Who's to be trusted here? And that's a very fundamental question. Trust, as we know in politics, is essential. And if we can't quite believe the leaders of this movement on the finances, then what else do we begin to doubt them about? And so I think this is absolutely, as the paper says this morning, a death spiral, because I think what you'll find is 101 things now unraveling before your eye.
And what then are the implications for, as you say, for Scotland, for the Scottish Parliament as well, for Scotland's electoral turnout, for enthusiasm among voters, perhaps to be part of this devolution arrangement, which in the grand scheme of things, I suppose, Alex, is relatively young, and certainly in terms of the experiences of drifting between parties and electoral cycles, the SNP have been dominant for so many years now that actually in terms of a variety of experiences, if I can put it like that, electorally, the Scottish Parliament still has a lot to learn, I suppose. So is the institution weakened by a crisis of this nature?
Yes. Because no parliament can withstand great questions of trust, and that is true of Westminster as much as it's true of any parliament in the world. And indeed, that is why, if you like, the Conservatives have gone through such a sort of turnover of prime ministers and such a sort of stramash of policy and presentation. But so let's take it back to Edinburgh. As you say, only 25 years old as an institution, now apparently exposed as being unable to hold people to account in a proper and rigorous way. So this is something of an existential crisis for it. I mean, one's mind pops across the water to Ireland, which famously became independent 100 years ago, but took at least 50 years to kind of sort out what that meant for it, and indeed hit something of a crisis in the 1980s, and then required a kind of national consensual program to kind of get its act on the road, which of course it's done with profound success. And a bit of me wonders if Scotland hasn't managed to get there in half the time, that now we need a kind of caliber of leader in Holyrood, a quality of delivery, and a clear sense of what it's for in order to survive. I go back, so your listeners are in no doubt. I believe in independence. I believe in Scotland, and therefore it would break my very heart to think that the Parliament wasn't succeeding and growing and being good. But equally, it breaks my heart to think that we're just going to be seduced by sales and marketing rather than by the substance that the country needs.